To you who are listening, are you listening? Are you really listening? Because Jesus says, love your enemies. Now, this passage from Luke is probably one of the hardest for us to hear. Or I should say, it's rather hard for me to proclaim. Love your enemies? I'm not sure that I can do that. I mean, maybe some of the time, but certainly not all the time. But not only are we called to love our enemies, but Jesus tells us to do good to them. If they ask, or if we perceive they are in need, we are to lend them whatever it is, without a hope of getting it back, ever getting it back. I almost thought that if they were not in my face, I wouldn't have to think about the difficulty of loving them. I could say to myself, okay, I love them if they live very far away and I didn't have to see them. That's easy to love. But this do good that Jesus implies is that they are in relationship with us. Maybe they're even part of our lives, and I dare say they are normally and usually in our face. What we have to hear today is the continuation of Luke's take on the Beatitudes, the one on the level ground, the one not from some high mountain where Jesus might find it hard to look in anyone's eyes, but right there, level ground, right in front of us, right in our face. Luke's Beatitudes are quite different because they're set in reality. They are meant for the here and for the now. And without hesitation, these Beatitudes call us into action. So if you think the call into action is a battle cry, Luke's conclusion throws quite a curveball to all of us. We might think there are a battle cry. We might think we can get on the bandwagon. We might think that we can do the stuff that needs to be done in our world. But the curveball is thrown out to us because Luke reminds us that our actions must be motivated by a certain kind of love. The love that has power to overcome hurts, overcome anger, overcome division, overcome bullying, overcome opinions, overcome attitudes, and dare I say, overcome politics. What I found helpful was to do a little unpacking. So I like to look in to see, not that I know Greek at all, but I actually know how to look things up. As most of you do, we just go on Google and we can do our little research. But I really wanted to figure out, Luke is interesting because he uses certain language or he uses certain words. So in Greek, the word love, actually there are 3 different words for the word love. The first is aran, and it describes a love that is passionate, a love that is physical, a love that is very intimate. The second is called philion, which describes the love that we have for our family and the love we have for our friends. It's really a warm, affectionate love. It's that love that comes from our heart, that feeling good kind of love. And then the third is agapan, which actually is a bit complex because it means that no matter what people do to us, we can never allow ourselves to desire anything but the person's highest good. And not only that, it reminds us that we will even go out of our way to be kind and good to them. So, out of the 3 Greek words, what do you think Luke used today in this gospel passage? He didn't use the first, which was all about that physical, affectionate, intimate love. He didn't use the second, which is easy love, I think, because it's that warm kind of love that we have in our hearts for our family and friends and for the people that we like, let's be honest. But no, he uses this other word, agapon. Now, we know this word because we sometimes call it agape, which is the word for a love feast, a feast that we can gather around tables and really love one another. But when I think of agape, I think of almost that other kind of love. I think of the affectionate love. I think of the warm-hearted love. But Luke doesn't. When he says agapon or agape, he's really talking about this love that tells us, calls us, pleads with us to go out of our way with those who we've identified as our enemies, not who have thought us to be their enemy, but our enemy. So there's a little difference there. It's not those people who find us as their enemy. It's actually those people who we've already identified as our enemy. You know, the people we don't want to be around. And it almost seems for us to behave in this way would be contrary to the way of the world. I mean, the world doesn't want us to love our enemies, do they? I mean, look at the world around us. I mean, when there are enemies, what happens? We create war. We go after them. We try to make them understand and see our point of view. Or we want to take them over so that they lose complete control. But let's be clear here. Jesus is not asking us to love in that passionate, attractive, and physical delight. Not that we're being asked to love in a way that is filled with great affection, respect, and heartfelt, but in a way that almost seems unnatural, which is the way that Jesus loved. Jesus expects us to join him in going against the grain of the world. Now, I believe that Jesus, through the voice of Luke, is giving us a deep insight into the way of the ethic of calling ourselves Christian. You know, there's a lot of talk about what it means to be a Christian. I mean, I have to say, every day on Instagram, there's somebody else telling me what it means to be a Christian. Now, I do have to say that I agree with almost all of them. When they talk about what it really means to be a Christian, it's actually not the way people say they're Christians out in the world. It's actually this way that Luke is describing. It is the fulfillment of his Beatitudes, that kind of love. The Christian ethic is always positive, and here Luke completes his beatitudinal way of living. And it does not consist in not doing, but actually in doing. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. According to biblical scholar William Barclay, the Christian ethic is based on doing the extra thing, not just being good, but being better than good. And so, with me, you might ask why. I mean, when we live in this way, it makes us like God, simply because that's exactly how God acts. So maybe the homework really for all of us is to define God. You know, I find myself in my life constantly defending God. When people say, oh, God took my mother away, God caused cancer, God did this, God caused destruction, God caused this. You know, I keep on going and saying, I don't know who your God is, but that's not my God. My God is that God who loves and forgives me completely and totally, no matter what I do, no matter who I am, no matter how I've been tripped up in my life. That's the God who loves me. So then that's how you and I are called to act in that same way, like God. I mean, we hear in the book of Genesis that you and I have been made in the image and likeness of God. We're to look like God in this world. People say, well, I don't know what God looks like. Well, I would love to say, well, just look around, because actually God looks like you and me. God looks like all of us. And more so than that, you and I are called to act like God. Merciful, forgiving, compassionate, always giving a second, third, fourth, fifth, and the biblical seventh chance, or 70 times 7, as Jesus said. That's how many times we forgive. The number doesn't exist. And that's who God is. And that's who you and I are called to be. But that's not easy, right? It's just not easy when we go through life. And we go through the burdens of life. And we meet people who are pretty hateful. We meet people who really don't do kind things to us. And we want to hate them. They're one of my favorite movies. And of course, I never remember the name of it. So one day I will, and then I'll tell you what it is, or later on this afternoon I'll remember it. But there's this great movie, and the lead character, she's really quite crazy throughout the whole movie. And her daughter says something about hating her boyfriend. And she looks at her daughter and says, hate's a very strong word. Hate is a very strong word. And yet, that's what happens to us, isn't it? That when someone does something to us, we get so angry and so overwhelmed and so frustrating that all it is to say we hate them, or we hate what they're doing to us. And so in many ways, they do become our enemy because we don't want to associate with them. We don't want to be near them. Except we have to go back to Genesis, and we have to go back to the story that we read today about Joseph. I mean, Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery. I mean, in actuality, they actually threw him into a pit and thought he was dead. Now, the beginning of that reading today was all about the brothers actually encountering Joseph, and they don't know what to make of this. They're actually quite frightened. And of course, Joseph knows it. And he looks right at them. And then he looks at them with love and compassion. So even right in the book of Genesis, in this great story of Joseph, we hear how we are called to act. No matter what people do to us, we cannot do to them. We need to learn how to live and how to forgive. I actually say we need to learn how to live into reconciliation. And the very end of our passage today is kind of strange, because Luke says something about putting it in our bosom, putting all of this in our bosom and carrying it with us, this notion of what it really means to love, to carry it in our bosom. So just to understand what that is all about, that in their tunic, that they would actually lift up their tunic and there would be a pocket inside where they would put the valuable things. When I was in the monastery and we wore habits, we actually had pockets that were, the kids loved us in the classroom because we'd go inside and we'd dig out a pen or we'd dig out a bunch of stuff. We had lots of things hidden all over us. But that's the sense that Luke is talking about. He's talking about putting it in the safest place, this kind of love. So it is in our bosom so that when we need it, we can actually pull it out and use it. We can actually pull it out and use it. I thought I would end our little reflection today. There are two books that I use just to do some research, and one is called The Gospels. It's a new translation by Sarah Rudin. It came out about 4 years ago. Just a wonderful translation. And she is a translator. She's not a biblical scholar. So when Sarah is translating the text, she's translating it authentically to what Luke wrote. So she is really going into the actual Greek and translating it. And so she talks about this sense of this bosom and this sacred place. But I thought I would actually end today with a translation which is a transliteration called The Message, because it's very amusing to me. And so I'm just going to read our gospel for today. Jesus says, "To those of you who are ready for the truth, I say this: love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit for tat stuff. Live generously." Here is a simple rule of thumb for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you. Then grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, do you expect a pat on the back? Run-of-the-mill sinners do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Garden variety sinners do that. If you only give for what you hope to get out of it, do you think that's charity? The stingiest of pawnbrokers does the same. I tell you, love your enemies, help and give without expecting a return. You'll never, I promise, regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way our Father lives towards you and toward us, generously and graciously, even when we're at our worst, because our God is kind. So therefore, you be kind.